Hello, MCU fans! So, Kevin Feige spilled a boatload of tea about the MCU's future. He gave interviews to several news outlets, and there is so much to discuss. So, let's dive right in and see what we can find out. Don't forget, we have a July contest running all month long. Be a subscriber, leave a comment. You could win a book or a steelbook. Best of luck. And we have a membership option with lots of cool perks, so you might check that out in case you're interested. Plus, hang around to the end of the video, and we'll talk about the Doomsday Countdown Watch on the Discord. All right, so we have so much to discuss, and I'm going to frame things around the possible Phase 6 slate. I mean, some of these things have been officially announced, some are just me dreaming and hoping. So as usual, anything in red is a Marvel movie, yellow is a Marvel TV show, and blue is Sony. So let's kick things off with the future of the MCU and the future of Feige himself. So Marvel Studios producer and president Kevin Feige hosted a sit-down with the press at Marvel's Burbank headquarters, gesturing towards a series of locked doors in a meeting room. He said that's the 7-year plan, and it goes till 2032. It's on magnets, and it can move around. So that's exciting. That means they've obviously planned out phases 7, 8, probably even some of phase 9. And in regard to Feige's own future and whether there's more Marvel under him, they reported that he's not going anywhere. While his contract is up in 2 years, he tells us, do I want to be making big movies for big audiences in 10 to 15 years from now? Yes, that's all I want to do, and Marvel is a great way to do that. But on the flip side, Feige did talk about some of the issues Marvel has had, in particular, the negative effect of too much content. So he said, we produced 50 hours of stories between 2007 and 2019. But in the 6 years since Avengers Endgame concluded the Infinity Saga, we've had well over 100 hours of stories in half the time, and that's just too much. And the article goes on to say that if you include animation, the Multiverse Saga spans 127 hours of content. So even Feige himself is saying that's just too much. So he explained, and also Disney CEO Robert Iger has said more than once, that Marvel's dramatic increase in volume spread Marvel too thin for its relatively small team of executives to keep up. So that's really the key to me. It's not so much that there was too much content, it's that the people on top, the executives, were unable to keep the quality level where it needed to be. So for the first time ever, quantity trumped quality. There's that phrase, right? We spent 12 years working on the Infinity Saga saying that's never going to happen to us. We always had more characters than we could possibly make because we weren't going to make a movie every month, and then suddenly there's a mandate to make more. And we go, well, we do have more, but we saw the negative result of that. So, Marvel has already pulled back on the amount of movies and shows it makes. Some years there may even be only one movie, like in Deadpool and Wolverine's case. Certainly there will be years with only one TV show. Now, be honest, that's hard to imagine. I'm betting that means live action, because they're always going to have a lot of animated shows. But anyway, Marvel has also started grinding down on budgets, with movies costing up to a third cheaper than the films from 2022 or 2023. And that is critical, because you don't have to make as much money in the box office if your budgets aren't so huge. And then Feige talked about the situation with Thunderbolts. He says, Thunderbolts I thought was a very, very good movie, but nobody knew that title, and many of those characters were from a TV show. So some audiences were still feeling the notion of, I guess I had to have seen those shows to understand who this is. Now this is really important. Feige himself said, if you actually saw the movie, that wouldn't be the case. And we make the movie so that's not the case. But I think we still have to make sure the audience understands that. That's critical. So I made a video talking about the fact that I didn't think really any of the Disney Plus shows are required viewing, because all the movies do exactly what Feige just said. They bring you up to speed so you didn't have to watch the shows. But here's the important part. If the audience doesn't believe that, then it doesn't matter. So I think you did not have to see Falcon and the Winter Soldier to understand U.S. Agent's role in Thunderbolts. But the audience didn't feel that way, so it really doesn't matter. So that's why there's going to be less connection between the TV shows and the movies going forward. All right, so now let's talk about some of the specific things in this possible slate. So let's start with the Spider-Verse. Got a small update I need to make here that basically the movie has moved back 3 weeks from June 4th to June 25th, which, hey, I'm fine. Take all the time they need, make this an awesome movie. So we're going to move that to June 25th. But while we're talking about the Spider-Verse, we learned it's ixnay on the live-action Miles Morales, at least for now. Because Kevin Feige basically said Sony Animation has a hold on that character while the Spider-Verse movies are going on. So they basically said, stay away from it, and for now, that is nowhere. There is no chance we're going to see a live-action Miles Morales probably until 2028, maybe even 2029. In fact, I'm going to bet he'll take over when Tom Holland ultimately retires the role. We'll see Miles go from there. All right, so since we're talking about Spider-Man, let's talk about a few updates on Brand New Day. So Feige talked about tonal malleability, meaning a character might be treated different ways depending on where he appears. And Punisher is a prime example. The violent vigilante played by Jon Bernthal is the subject of a special that just began shooting last week and will air on Disney Plus next year, and it will be TVMA. But when the Punisher is in the next Spider-Man movie, it'll be a different tonality, said Feige, which basically was him confirming the character is in the film. I think we all thought that by now, but it's great to hear it from the exec himself. Also, we get a great confirmation from Feige, because he says, so when you do that, you say, okay, who are the other street-level characters? Yes, telling us it will be a street-level movie, right? So what are the street-level characters we've never seen him interact with? And of course, I love that Punisher started in the Spider-Man comic, that great cover. I don't want to say too much, but Destin, well, I will say too much. Destin is doing an amazing job right now on that movie, which starts shooting very soon. He's got 8 or 9 comic covers on his wall in his art department that he's bringing to life in the movie, which is super cool. Yes, it is super cool, and I really hope this is one of the covers they're bringing to life. Probably one of the best Spider-Man covers ever. All right, since we've been talking about The Punisher, let's also talk about Daredevil Born Again Season 2. So my guess is the special presentation will come out right before Season 2, but we'll have to wait and see on that. But Feige used this opportunity to bring up once again this idea of less connections between the TV shows and movies. He said, I think allowing a TV show to be a TV show is what we're returning to. So in particular, he was asked whether the end of Thunderbolts, where Century basically turned the entire population of Manhattan into an inky black shroud of depressive nothingness, would that affect Season 2 of Daredevil Born Again? Well, Feige had a simple answer. No. Now, I think that's important because, again, it's showing the shows and the movies are not going to connect as much. But I've shown in my recent timeline video the reason I think we won't have a connection between Thunderbolts and Daredevil Born Again. I think they're almost 6 months apart in the timeline and that was done intentionally. So yes, everything Feige said is true. There's going to be less connections between the TV shows and the movies, but I think they're going to make it make sense. So we'll have to wait and see when Daredevil Born Again Season 2 comes out, but I think there's going to be no way for there to be a connection between the two. All right, so now let's talk about Champions/Young Avengers, which I still think is going to happen as a TV show, but we'll have to wait and see. All right, so Feige was asked a lot of different things in this interview, including whether he felt the MCU was DEI or woke, and basically said, no, I don't think so. But he did dovetail off that discussion to talk about one of his favorite Phase 4 castings, and that was Iman Vellani as Miss Marvel. He says, I can't wait to see her somewhere. So naturally, people wanted to know, well, when's that going to happen? When are we going to see her again? And he gave his typical Kevin Feige evasive answer, right? They said, hey, at the end of the Marvels, we saw Kamala Khan appearing to recruit Haley Steinfeld's Kate Bishop to be part of a young superhero team. But Feige danced around about whether or not it's going to be a film, a TV series, or a special. So in answer to the question of whether the team will be forming, he gave the incredibly helpful response of potentially. He said in that case, it comes down to where's the best story, who would be fun to see with them, etc. So I think it's going to happen. Let me know your thoughts in the comments, but I really think we're going to see the team forming probably before Secret Wars. So then the question came up about what about some of these other big teases? Clea, Star Fox, Hercules. When are we going to see these characters show up again next? Well, while Kang's future, or the lack thereof, is more obvious, in fact, we'll talk more about that in just a second, interesting stuff there. Anyway, Feige was far more circumspect about whether audiences can expect to see the other A-list cameos, Clea, Hercules, Star Fox, even Mephisto, in some later projects. Well, the reporters weren't going to put up with that, because they said, hey, you're the one that included these characters with a promise they would return at some point. And Feige countered by saying, well, keep in mind, Tim Blake Nelson's character, the leader from 2008's Incredible Hulk, didn't come back for 17 years until 2025's Captain America Brave New World. And he said, that's fun to me. So he said, hey, let's talk again in 12 years to see who comes back. I really want a more definitive answer on that, but his point is valid. You never know in the MCU who's going to pop up and when. All right, so before we get to Doomsday and Secret Wars, I just want to mention this slot I think Marvel's going to drop. There's too much going on around this time frame. I don't think we're going to see anything on May 7th, but I am still hoping this mystery July 23rd date is going to be filled with something, and fingers crossed, it'll be Doctor Strange 3. So we'll have to wait and see on that. But anyway, Doomsday, lots of interesting information about it. So first of all, let's talk about this pivot away from Kang, because it seems it was much earlier than we thought. Feige said, even before what had happened to the actor, referring to Majors and his legal situations, we had started to realize that Kang wasn't Thanos. There was only one character that could be that, because he was in the comics for decades and decades, and because of the Fox acquisition, we finally had it, and that was Doctor Doom. We started talking about Doctor Doom even before we officially pivoted from Kang. In fact, I started talking with Robert, obviously Robert Downey Jr., about this audacious idea before Ant-Man 3 even came out. Wow, that's shocking. So basically, what he's saying is, before Quantumania even came out in the theater, they were already talking about bringing in Doctor Doom as the big bad. Now that's a little confusing, because then why did we have the post-credit scenes in Quantumania with these three and with the Kang Council? So my guess is they were still planning on doing Kang Dynasty, and in fact I did a video on potentially what that script might have looked like, but they were still going to have the Beyonder Kang, if you will, create Battleworld, but then in Secret Wars, that's when I think Doctor Doom would have come in. But we'll never know, so we just have to trust Feige that they really were planning this Doctor Doom for quite some time. But along that line, let's talk about Marvel's script writing process and how that impacts movies such as Doomsday. So Feige said Marvel has never started a movie without a full script. And I think that's important, because there are rumors the Doomsday script isn't complete. Well, Feige is saying that it is, so I don't know what else to do with that other than to trust him. But he says they've never been satisfied with the script the company has had, and he's never even been satisfied with the movie we've released. In other words, he always wants to see things improve. What he and the company like to do is something he refers to as plussing at every turn. So basically, there's plussing happening every day on the Avengers Doomsday set right now. And it's amazing to watch because of what those filmmakers, those actors, both the ones that are playing these characters for the first or second time and the one playing them for the 10th or 12th time. They're the best in the world at it. They know the characters so well. So if they have an idea, you want to listen to it and you want to adjust it and you want to improve it. I wouldn't want to change that. So then along that line, he dropped a very interesting piece of information. Stephen McFeely is writing the script, I'm assuming as the head writer, but Feige revealed that Loki creator Michael Waldron is also helping. Okay, so I'm really excited about that, because obviously Michael Waldron wrote Loki Season 1, basically he created the multiverse, and he also wrote Multiverse of Madness. So therefore, he is the expert on the multiverse, and he's probably there just to consult on how it works. But I understand, especially from some comments on a recent post I made about this announcement, that not everyone is excited to see him back, because they view that what he did to Wanda in Multiverse of Madness was, well, just wrong, turning her into a villain. But my argument is, if you look at that post-credit scene to WandaVision, she's literally reading the Book of the Damned, the Darkhold, and it is calling out to her, convincing her that her children exist across the multiverse. So she was being possessed by the most evil book on the planet. I really don't know what else they were supposed to do with the character in Multiverse of Madness. I mean, it's very similar to the Shang-Chi movie, where Wenwu was tricked by the Dweller in Darkness into thinking that his wife was still around and he could save her. And in the process, he killed a bunch of people, only to find out he was being lied to. So I really kind of view them in the same way, Wenwu and Wanda. They were misled, did some terrible things, but eventually repented in the end. So yeah, I'm glad to have Waldron back, but let me know your thoughts. I know people have some very different opinions on this. All right, so now let's talk about Secret Wars. So one of the things we learned is we are going to be getting a new X-Men team, but maybe as early as right after Doomsday. Because the article says many of the actors who starred in the X-Men movies of the 2000s and 2010s are reprising those roles in 2026's Avengers Doomsday. Now that includes Patrick Stewart, Ian McKellen, Alan Cumming, Rebecca Romijn, James Marsden, Kelsey Grammer, and probably more yet to be announced. But then the article tells us in future films, which to me implies by the time of Secret Wars, those X-Men characters who appeared in the previous movies will be played by new actors, along with mutants making their big screen debut. Wow. So maybe, just maybe, Doomsday is the swan song for those OG X-Men. That is wild. The article goes on to say the decision echoes changes in the composition of the Marvel Comics following the 2015 Secret Wars storyline, which involved multiple timelines collapsing and reconverging, mixing up the characters of the main Marvel timeline in the process. So Feige says we're utilizing that story not just to round out the stories we've been telling post-Endgame, but just as importantly, and you can look at the Secret Wars comics for where it takes you, it very, very much sets up for the future. So Feige said Endgame is literally about endings and Secret Wars is about beginnings. I love him framing it that way. That makes so much sense. But then Feige is careful not to characterize the changes as a reboot, but instead, Secret Wars will serve as a reset for the MCU. Reboot is a very scary word. Reboot can mean a lot of things to a lot of people. Reset, singular timeline, we're thinking along those lines. And X-Men is where that's going to happen next. So yeah, the key is multiverse no more. We're getting down to one singular timeline that has all the characters in it. So what does that mean? Well, it definitely means we won't be getting a hard reboot like we saw, for example, in Crisis on Infinite Earths. Basically, DC, after 50 years, said, you know what? We're starting over with a brand new universe. There is no connection between the two. And by the way, it was a really cool storyline, but that was a hard reboot. Instead, with the Secret Wars 2015 storyline, you basically had all the universes collapsing together. I mean, at the end, you saw the 1610 universe's Miles Morales now hanging out with 616's Spider-Man, all in the same universe. But here's the key. Their past histories were kept intact. It wasn't like this new universe was a total reboot and starting over. Instead, they just combined all the characters into one universe. And I think that's really important. I talk a little bit more about that on how I think the reboot will go, or now Feige is calling a reset. But you can check out this video if you want to see what I think will end up happening. So also we learned we're going to be getting a new Tony and a new Steve. Even more intriguingly, Feige also indicated that other Marvel characters will eventually be recast. That includes Tony Stark and Steve Rogers. He pointed to many other major film franchises that have done the same thing many times over, like James Bond, right? James Bond has changed multiple times, and people still are excited to see who's going to be the next James Bond. However, he did imply that at least two legacy characters are staying around for a bit. That would be Deadpool and Wolverine, and I'm so happy to hear that. He says, I think there's more fun to be had with both of those characters, but we'll have to see where. Okay, so that's it for Phase 6. Now let's talk about some of the things we might have learned about Phase 7. So with Phase 7, we have 4 open movie slots, and my guess is we kick off with X-Men, and then I just can't imagine we won't get Black Panther 3 and Shang-Chi, and then down along the bottom, you can see some other movies that may be happening, may never be happening. But anyway, let's talk about all of this. Okay, so the X-Men movie, we did learn some more about that. So we already learned we're getting a new X-Men team, but we're now learning that it's going to be a younger cast and will be directed by Jake Schreier, who did Thunderbolts. And I'm really excited about that. I thought that was a terrific movie. So Feige goes on to say, Jake's an incredibly smart guy, and he's an incredibly talented filmmaker. We had a great experience with him on Thunderbolts. If you saw the movie, what he did with those character interactions, he has the pulse on, shall we say, a younger demographic. He's younger than me for sure, but he's tapped into that in a way that I think is important. It was important for Thunderbolts, and it's much more important for the X-Men, because X-Men, as it was in the comics, will be a very youth-oriented, focused, and cast movie. So I think that's important. That means they're going to have a cast that can play the roles for many years to come. All right, so now let's talk about, well, not necessarily Shang-Chi 2, but how the concept of this movie brought up an interesting topic. So, the most tantalizing moment in the interview came when a reporter asked Feige about how often Marvel plans to make films that focus on a single character, like Shang-Chi, rather than a giant team-up film. So Feige said, we were talking about a structure of an upcoming post-Secret Wars movie that I won't name, but I will say, like Shang-Chi, it's getting back to what genre haven't we done before and want to do now, and how could that movie be that genre? We would focus on a singular storyline by embracing a certain genre we haven't done in a while. Interesting. Very interesting. We'll have to see what that's going to be. All right, let's talk about Thor. So some of the characters are being rebooted. X-Men, Tony Stark, Steve Rogers down the line. But what about characters like Thor? Well, that topic definitely came up in the interview. With Downey Jr. now playing Dr. Doom, are there plans to recast the core Iron Man, Captain America, etc. on the big screen? And we kind of talked about Iron Man and Captain America, but then Feige went on to talk about Chris Hemsworth and to say that he is still in his prime to play Thor. Yay, that's awesome. We really, really need a Thor 5. He deserves a nice finish to his character at some point, and I'm fine if he plays a character for another 10 years, to be honest. And that just shows, again, how it's going to be a reset, not a reboot, because they're going to carry some of these storylines from the multiverse saga, heck, even the Infinity Saga, into the next saga in Phase 7 and beyond. So then it goes on to say, in the long term, like many other storied movie franchises, Marvel classic superheroes will get new faces. When exactly? Well, the X-Men is where that will happen. So again, X-Men is happening first, then down the road, Captain America, Iron Man, and then eventually even characters like Thor. Okay, so now let's talk about Blade. So Feige didn't say too much, but he did confirm that there have been 4 takes of Blade that have been developed in recent times, 2 that were period pieces, 2 that were not. So Marvel has now landed on modern day, and yes, Ali is still attached. Thank goodness. He's going to be an awesome Blade. And I think when they talk about modern day, that's because we might not even get a Blade movie. Maybe it's going to go straight into Midnight Suns, but that's going to be a way to bring in all these characters like Man-Thing, Moon Knight, Ghost Rider, of course Blade, and bring them together in a team-up. And I can't wait. That will be incredible. And then finally, we got to talk about Eternals because they did come up. So Feige was asked, what about major characters like Moon Knight or the Eternals? Would they return? His answer was, I don't know that it's any of the specific ones you just named, but yes, that's part of the plan. Characters we introduced post-Endgame will pop up again in some of the upcoming movies and beyond. The fun of comics is anyone popping up anywhere. And that is exciting. Basically, as we move into Phase 7 and beyond, you never know. These characters may suddenly show up. I mean, the leader, again, showed up 17 years later. So, yeah, very, very exciting. All right, so that is what he discussed regarding the open Phase 7 movie slate. Now, he didn't really talk much about the Phase 7 and beyond TV slate, although I'm sure at least some of these shows we'll be seeing in the future. So there you go. Those are all the things Feige said in his massive interview with the press. So what are you thinking about all this? Are you excited about the future of the MCU? What questions do you have? Do you think some of my theories are right about where things are going? Let me know in the comments because you know I love to read and respond to everything. Also, don't forget we have the July contest. Be a subscriber, leave a comment, win a book or a steelbook. And we have the membership option in case you're interested in that. And I always love to mention the Discord. Here we are in the Marvel News section talking about all of this crazy, crazy new information we learned. Also, I promised I would talk about the Doomsday Countdown rewatch. Every day listed here at 7 p.m. Eastern, we'll watch a different movie or show as we prepare for the December 18th, 2026 release of Doomsday. So we have 2,300 members across the globe, conversations 24/7, and I'll leave a pinned comment so you can join. Also, if you don't mind, like this video, subscribe if you haven't already. You can check out more content, and we'll all continue to enjoy the ever-growing, the ever-changing Marvel Cinematic Universe.